My greedy son plotted to steal our home, so I kicked him out and cut him off entirely. I'm a 57-year-old owner of a small grocery store in town, a business that's been in my family for 3 generations. I never thought I'd have to choose between my children, but life has a way of forcing impossible decisions on us. Looking back now, I can see how my own actions helped create the situation that nearly destroyed our family. My wife, Jill, and I raised 3 children together in our modest 2-story home on Maple Street. She's a dedicated doctor at St. Mary's Hospital, while I run the family grocery store that served our community since my grandfather first opened its doors in 1947. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we provided a comfortable life for our kids. Jim, 23, Emily, 20, and Michael, 17. The store hasn't made us rich, but it's kept food on the table and paid for braces, school trips, and the occasional family vacation to the beach. Jim, our oldest, was always the rebel. From the moment he could walk, he was causing trouble, breaking neighbors' windows, playing baseball, stealing candy from my store, getting into fights at school. I cleaned up his messes, made excuses for his behavior, convinced myself it was just a phase he'd grow out of. Boys will be boys, I tell Jill when she expressed concern. After all, he was my son, my firstborn, the one who first called me daddy and made me feel like I could conquer the world. When Jim got his girlfriend Katie pregnant at 22, they rushed into marriage. I supported them, hoping responsibility would finally make him grow up. I paid for a small wedding at the local church, bought them basic furniture, even helped with the first month's rent on their apartment. Then came the news. They couldn't afford the place anymore because Jim kept losing jobs. He'd work somewhere for a few weeks, then either quit because it was beneath him or get fired for not showing up. He begged us to let them stay until he found steady work. Jill was hesitant, but I convinced her. He's our son, I said. We can't turn our backs on family. Those words would come back to haunt me. The problem started almost immediately. First, it was complaints about their room being too small, even though it was the same room he'd grown up in. Then came suggestions that Katie wasn't comfortable sharing space with him. I offered our guest room as an alternative, but that wasn't good enough. He wanted Katie to share a room with Emily, who was studying for her pre-med finals. When I refused, he had the audacity to suggest that Jill and I should give up our master bedroom. The demands escalated like a slow-rising flood. He treated his siblings like personal servants, expecting them to clean up after him, do his laundry, take care of his baby. When Emily refused, focused on her studies, he'd throw tantrums worthy of his infant son. He'd follow her around the house, calling her selfish, claiming she thought she was too good for her own family. Michael, my youngest, started spending more time at friends' houses just to avoid the tension. Our home's atmosphere changed. The comfortable family dinners we'd always enjoyed became battlegrounds. Jill works long hours at the hospital, so I always make sure dinner is ready when she gets home. It's our ritual, a moment of peace in her hectic day. But Jim started eating her portions before she arrived, then had the nerve to get angry when I asked him to replace what he took. He'd raid Emily's meals too, leaving her hungry after long days of studying. What we didn't know then was that Jim was already plotting. He'd been researching local elder law attorneys, gathering information about conservatorship and power of attorney. He'd even started spreading rumors in the neighborhood about how Jill and I were getting forgetful and struggling to manage the house. He'd tell anyone who would listen about how worried he was about us living alone, how he just wanted to help his aging parents. The situation with the baby became another point of conflict. Jim would demand that Emily babysit, claiming she had nothing better to do since she didn't have a job or kids of her own. When I pointed out that her studies were a full-time commitment, he scoffed. What's more important than family? He'd ask, without a trace of irony. I shut down his demands, reminding him that her education came first. But he'd just wait until I was at the store to start harassing her again. Katie, his wife, became increasingly withdrawn. She'd spend hours in their room, coming out only when necessary. When she did emerge, I noticed how she flinched at loud noises, how she'd check Jim's mood before speaking. I should have recognized the signs. Jill certainly did, But I was still wearing my father's blinders, seeing only what I wanted to see. Everything changed one evening in late March. I came home from the store to find Emily unconscious at the bottom of the stairs, her textbooks scattered around her like fallen leaves. My heart stopped. Jim wasn't home, wouldn't answer his phone. I rushed her to Jill's hospital, my hand shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. When Jim finally showed up the next morning, his response chilled me to the bone. "It's not a big deal. You're overreacting. She'll revive soon." Later, we discovered the full extent of his scheme. He'd been systematically going through our personal papers when we were out, making copies of our financial documents, deed to the house, and insurance policies. He'd opened credit cards in my name using information he'd stolen from my office. He'd even started the paperwork to transfer the grocery store's ownership to himself, forging my signature on several documents. His plan, as we pieced it together, was frighteningly detailed. He'd been gathering evidence of our supposed mental decline, taking photos of minor household repairs we hadn't gotten to, documenting every time Jill worked late or I forgot something at the store. He'd been in contact with a shady lawyer who specialized in family asset protection, code for helping adult children seize control of their parents' assets. The lawyer had drawn up papers that would have given Jim power of attorney over both Jill and me, using his status as our eldest child and our declining mental state as justification. He'd planned to force us into a retirement home, claiming it was for our own good. Once we were out of the house, he intended to sell it in the store, using our grandson as leverage to keep us compliant. He'd even started looking at luxury homes in another state, planning to use our life's work to fund his fresh start. Jill and I took turns staying at the hospital with Emily. Every time I went home to get supplies, I found evidence of parties, empty bottles, cigarette burns on the furniture, trash everywhere. The house I'd worked so hard to maintain was being destroyed piece by piece. But the truth was far worse than mere disrespect for our home. One afternoon, I came back home to take a nap. Jim was upstairs, his voice carrying through the heating vent, an old quirk of our house's construction that had often betrayed the kids' secrets when they were younger. He was on the phone with his lawyer, bragging about how easy it would be to convince a judge that we were incompetent. "My mom works insane hours at the hospital," he said, "and my dad's getting forgetful. Sometimes he even burns dinner." He laughed. No one's going to question a concerned son looking out for his aging parents. Then he mentioned Emily. She discovered his plan when she found some of the legal documents in his room while looking for a missing textbook. She confronted him about it, threatening to expose him. So he pushed her down the stairs, then ran, leaving his sister for dead. He was laughing about it on the phone, calling it a happy accident that might actually help his case. After all, what competent parents would let their daughter fall down the stairs? I felt sick to my stomach. The security camera I'd installed after a break-in attempt last year had captured everything. My hands trembled as I watched the footage. My son, my firstborn, deliberately shoving his sister. The rage in his face was that of a stranger. I watched it 3 times, hoping to see something different, something that would make it not true. But there it was in stark black and white, the truth about who my son had become. That evening, I confronted him. "Get out," I said, holding up my phone with the video evidence. "Leave now, or I'm going to the police." He stared at me, his face twisting into something ugly. "You'll never see your grandson again." He spat, but I stood firm. My daughter was still in the hospital because of him. I had other children to protect. Katie chose to leave with him, cradling their baby close. I slipped her my business card with my personal cell number written on the back. "If you ever need help," I whispered. She nodded almost imperceptibly before following Jim out the door. Emily recovered slowly, eventually telling us everything. Jim had been planning this for months, maybe even before Katie got pregnant. He'd used our love for him and our attachment to our grandson to manipulate us, counting on my guilt and Jill's exhaustion to make us vulnerable. He'd threatened Emily when she discovered his scheme, warning her to keep quiet or accidents happen. She'd been trying to figure out how to tell us when he attacked her. After they left, we discovered more evidence of his plans. He'd already contacted real estate agents about listing the house, claiming he had power of attorney. He'd been embezzling money from the store, small amounts that he thought we wouldn't notice. He'd even started spreading rumors at Jill's hospital about her memory problems, laying groundwork for his claims about her competency. It's been 6 months since I threw Jim out. Sometimes, when the guilt threatens to overwhelm me, I remind myself of Emily in that hospital bed, of Jill crying by her side. I still secretly call Katie, checking on my grandson. She's found a small apartment. Not much, but clean and safe. Jim left them too, disappearing without a trace. Like father, like son, I suppose. He'd learned manipulation from watching me enable his behavior all those years. The hardest part isn't losing Jim. In truth, I lost him long ago to his own selfishness. The hardest part is accepting my role in creating the monster he became. Every time I cleaned up his messes, made excuses for his behavior, I taught him that consequences were for other people. I failed him by never letting him fail. These days, our home is peaceful again. Emily graduated with honors and is starting medical school in the fall, following in her mother's footsteps. Michael's grades have improved now that he feels comfortable being home. Jill and I have grown closer, stronger through the ordeal. Sometimes I catch myself waiting for Jim to appear, to apologize, to be the son I always wanted him to be. But then I remember Emily at the bottom of those stairs, and I know some bridges can't be rebuilt. The store still opens every morning at 7. I still make dinner for Jill every night. Life goes on, but it's different now. I've learned that being a good parent sometimes means making painful choices. We've installed better security systems, changed all our passwords, and put additional legal protections in place. The lawyer Jim had been working with is under investigation by the State Bar Association. Looking back, I should have seen the pattern. In high school, he'd borrow money from my wallet, claiming he needed it for school supplies, but spending it on video games and cigarettes. When he crashed my car at 17, I defended him to the insurance company, saying I was the one driving. Every time he got in trouble, I was there with my checkbook and my excuses, teaching him the worst possible lesson: that actions don't have consequences, not for him. They say blood is thicker than water, but sometimes the weight of blood is what drowns us. I choose now to protect the family members who bring love and light into our lives, even if it means cutting ties with the one who brought darkness. Last week, Katie sent me a picture of my grandson taking his first steps. I keep it in my wallet, next to where I used to keep my excuses for Jim. It's not the happy ending I dreamed of as a young father, but it's the ending we needed to survive. And maybe someday it will be enough. This story isn't just about my family drama. It's about the courage to face my mistakes, the wisdom to change course when necessary, and the strength to choose difficult right over comfortable wrong. It reminds me that true love sometimes requires tough decisions, and that protecting our loved ones occasionally means protecting them from our own instincts to shield them from all pain. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them, so please leave a comment. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want more stories like this one.